done in the United States. This whole center's name is a reaction, or so we say, a response or a critique of that kind of binary thinking. Interdisciplinary means, well, it's not just one discipline. It's many disciplines coming together. The environmental movement. There are numerous other movements that are articulating this agenda, and yet there are conservative forces in the society that don't want to see it happen, because it would be a radical transformation of the country and probably make the United States be more like what it says it is already than it is. But to get there is not going to take place by just people saying, oh, I'm multiracial. That's not it. I do argue that this has to be really a rigorous struggle, and that the educational system is really one of the most important tools for doing this, that right now it becomes another form of social control, and yet if you teach students to think subversively about accepting information, about critiquing things that they hear, and also operating in non-dichotomous, that is either or ways, as well as non-hierarchical, the impact can be significant. The current multicultural curriculum that we have, which is attempting to tackle this, to me is limited only because it's functioning only out of D, equality of difference. So we have to do that. That has to happen. If you don't have equality of difference, you can't have equality of similarity. But what there isn't enough discussion about is the transcultural, if you want to call it that. What do you do now with all these differences when people come together? What comes out of that? Can something equitable come out of that that's not hierarchical? And again, the question is open. I don't have the answer. I'm simply positing that this is it's a new opportunity in the United States because it is a new identity. We haven't seen it before. It is not a re-articulation of some of the old. And it needs to be respected, but people need to have their antenna on. You need to be aware. You need to be alert. You need to be alert, period. Anybody who's talking race. But particularly, I believe it is very key to be able to distinguish between types of multiracial identities and types of people. Because I have met many people who, unfortunately, I hate to say it, who are not articulating what I call the new multiracial identity, but doing some of that old stuff, and it makes me very uncomfortable. I think Q&A would probably be appropriate here. I'm looking at our time. There probably will be some interesting things. I didn't talk about the census because it's a total mess. It's the one chapter in the book that everybody loves, and it's the one that I had the least fun writing. But it is fascinating when you see what went on behind the scenes. But I didn't bring that up purposely. But also, since most of you are students or a significant majority, I don't want you to feel you have to buy my book. If you already have it and you want me to sign it, I'm more than flattered. If you want to come by my office and you get a copy later, I'll give you a personal signing. How about that? A free signing. But this is not intended, and I'm sure I don't need to say this is not a book tour. Where I'm trying to get people to buy my book. I certainly hope you read it. There are copies in the library. But I'm most happy that you actually just attended the talk today. And I'm open to any questions that anyone might have. Or comments, even. Well, that's it. Does anyone have, no, seriously, Mark.
Can I ask a question about your chart?
You may indeed, but be really cautious. I'm very sensitive about this chart.
Under pluralism up there, okay. What is E?
Okay, I didn't go there because I didn't want to get into trouble. Well, okay. E is a kind of ethnic nationalism, which in response to white supremacy and white domination talks about other kinds of supremacy. In other words, it's like, you had us on the bottom, now we're going to come kick your butt. We're going to shift the hierarchy. And unfortunately, a lot of ethnic nationalists across communities articulate that. But it's a logical response to a previous oppression. It's not coming out of a vacuum. But it's certainly a halfway house. It's incomplete. It challenges the positioning of people in the hierarchy, but it just recreates a new one. In other words, well, I'm going to put you on the bottom. A lot of people really articulate rhetoric that maybe doesn't really, where the underlying premises are not that. But if you listen to a lot of black nationalism, a lot of Latino nationalism, Native American, whatever, it can get kind of abrasive at times. You hear it in the women's movement as well. I mean, some of the things they say about men, I mean, gay people and straights, I mean, it goes down the line. But clearly, it can't be taken out of context. I mean, people who've been in pain are not necessarily going to welcome the people who gave them pain as brothers and sisters. That's not the way human nature necessarily functions. And yet I argue that's actually the most important thing that we have to be doing, as painful as that is. Seeing the structure that is oppressing everybody, including the people who think they're at the top. I believe they're being deprived of their humanity simultaneously. Even the power to oppress someone else, to me, is a dehumanization. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh man, he has been sniffing some new age glue. You know, like, whoa, that's like too weird. But I'm serious about that. I'm actually absolutely serious. To me, this is really a human liberation struggle, and part of the whole problem has been this either-oring of people as dominant and subordinate. And when you really look at the complex intersection of so many, or the interlinking of a variety of different categories of difference, it's much, much more complicated. And so I would argue that European Americans need to be liberated from their own issues just as much as people of color do in the struggle for our common human liberation. But for people to take on that task requires people to jump across the walls, tear down the boundaries, and come out there. And people on the other side often will critique you and criticize you and laugh at you and say, oh, you're stupid, or why do you care about that? And I'm thinking, well, are we not in this together? I mean, is that what this is about? If you know, we're in the struggle as comrades, then it's about humans, who happen to be many different kinds of people. But ultimately, that should be a common goal. We haven't gotten anywhere close to that. But I argue that that is definitely the direction we should be going, not trivializing any of the possible responses that people have to oppression, but that some of them are, shall we say, less complete than others. Is that it? Paul. Oh, all right. Tell me your name.
Ihani.
Ihani, okay.
My question's kind of it's kind of long. I just wanted to know, you touched on this briefly, colorism. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know what your views on colorism are within the black community. And do you believe colorism is institutionalized?
Now, when you say what are my views, what do you mean by that?
What do you think about colorism? What do you...
Do you mean, do I think it exists, or do I think it's good, bad, or neutral? I mean...
All of that.
Okay. I think it's bad. Okay, very bad. And yet it's part of the larger system of... I mean, other groups of color have internalized views of themselves based on the dominant group. And even among European Americans have varying ethnic backgrounds. They've internalized images of themselves often as based on the North European model. So we're talking about a variety of different continuums of colorism, or physicalisms, if you want to call it, or featureism. If you look at the income levels, I didn't go into a lot of numbers and stats here because I just think that's useless. You know, it's in the book, and if you want to find out, I can give you more of that. The income level among African American identified people who are physically more approximate to European Americans is higher than that of darker individuals. And all you have to do is just look around you and see who's doing windows and who's not doing windows, and that will tell you right there. I mean, that's the story. The difference between lighter skinned, as the research says, and darker skinned African Americans, the divide between those two populations is as great as the divide between whites and all African Americans. It's the same in the Latino community. It depends on the community you're talking about, the region, but this issue of colorism is so pervasive, it is so normalized, we don't even think about it. But it gives people this unearned opportunity to do all kinds of things. In the movie industry, to get positioned, to get roles as an actress or an actor, or a variety of things, getting white-collar jobs. People will think you're smarter. I mean, they've done some studies and shown that European Americans and often African Americans will think that a lighter-skinned person is just smarter. The person could be whatever smart means. Obviously, we're not talking SAT scores, but the key is that there are all kinds of constructions of what whiteness means, and one of them means smart, clean, a variety of things to get encoded in people's thinking, and people will see themselves in relationship to that standard. So unfortunately, historically, people of African descent have internalized this. It was, shall we say, injected from the outside. I would say that a lot of that was undermined by the black consciousness movement in the 60s. But it hasn't eradicated, because in the larger society, the messages in the media, I mean, what children see as attractive, acceptable, positive, all of it really is associated with varying kinds of things that are default or de facto or literally white. And so how do you instill in a child of color that it's a wonderful thing to be an African American? It's one of the best things to happen to you. It's wonderful to be Asian American. The world would not be the kind of beautiful place it is if you weren't here as a Native American. When the messages out there are either non-existent or very negative. And so, I say it's children internalized very early, and it's across groups. The whole blonde brunette thing among European Americans is not a whole lot different in some ways in terms of the way it gets articulated, in that, blue eyes versus brown eyes, Durasoft context lenses, turn your brown eyes blue. Well, why? Might they work? You know, but the message is, well, brown eyes are boring. You won't get a date. You won't get a husband. You won't get a wife. Those messages are so pervasive in the magazines and the media that until that changes, being able to protect oneself as well as